So first off, I'd like to introduce Mr. Johnson from the Hartford Professional Chapter. We actually had the luxury of meeting him, myself, and the lead of our tech team, he gave actually a pretty impressive presentation on using drone and satellite imagery to survey different pieces of land and communities for environmental engineering projects, which is basically all that EWB does. His custom code is something that I've also like to use in my spare time. I'll let him take it.
Thanks, Josh. So like Josh said, I did a presentation at our Northeast it's called the Connecticut Conference, but it's really the Northeast region conference. And yeah, that's kind of what I was focusing on, was how do you use aerial photography or whether it's drone or aerial or actually satellite, and how have I been using it in our Hartford Professional Chapters projects in Tanzania. So I kind of figured I'd share that. I think I'm going to focus. It's not, this is kind of like a code workshop, so I kind of wanted to more focus, less high level on which was the presentation I gave, and try to get a little bit more into some of the code stuff that I've been doing. So I guess I'll start from there. So let me just share my screen quick. Okay. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
I see a couple of nods. All right, awesome. All right, so this is a presentation that I gave at our New England conference, it's called the Connecticut Conference. It was in the Northeast region. So I'm going to kind of skip around and work through, kind of highlight a few things. I know I don't have an hour and a half like I did at the Connecticut Conference, so I'll skip around, show a couple of things, highlight some code, and I'll show a couple. Definitely, I want to show a new tool that I've picked up since I gave this presentation. So the first thing Josh alluded to is kind of a little bit of drone photography. There's a process out here called photogrammetry. I don't know if some people have ever heard of that, wherein you take a bunch of pictures of an object from various different angles, and you can actually the algorithms behind photogrammetry can pick out and turn that back into a 3D shape. So a couple of companies have figured out how to, yep.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but I don't think we can see your presentation.
Okay. How about now?
Now it's there.
There it is. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Thanks for the heads up. So like I was saying, one of the things we can do is if we can have a drone, how photogrammetry works is it takes a bunch of pictures of an object, and the algorithm behind it can figure out what the actual 3D shape of the object is by looking for common points inside all the pictures. And then understanding some things about what the actual camera, the distortion and the focal length of the camera, it can actually create a 3D model of the object you're taking a picture of. So some companies have figured out how to do that with actual landscape. So our group is in Tanzania, has a project in the northern half of Tanzania. We had a failed dam that was in our community, and while our primary path is to put in a well, as part of the alternatives analysis, we looked at rehabbing the dam. So we essentially did a flight over the entire area. It's essentially a DJI drone just running a zigzag pattern. So here you can see it gives you this really nice high-res photographic picture when you're all done, so you can actually see the ears on all the lamb that happened to be wandering around while we were doing the scan. But here it took all of those pictures and it created an actual 3D model of it. So here you can actually see where the dam was. You can see where the dam failed. All the dark brown spots happen to be the trees, but you can actually get some really, really high level detail in all of these, essentially a detailed altitude measurement of the actual area. In our case, you can kind of look at some of these little dark spots. These are actually hand-dug pits that some of the people in the community were digging in order to get to surface water. So this is a kind of an application of one of the things we can do. I took this data, and one of the things it gave me was a solid model. So I can actually compute what the volume that we could actually fill this dam up with. So we could actually compute, the amount of water we could actually fill this thing with. And we can look at how much, okay, if we scooped this much out and added this, how much, to the top of the dam, how much more water fill could we get? So that's an application of one of the things we can do with it. There's a ton of stuff you can do. If you're ever thinking about doing something like this at one of your projects, I would highly recommend doing some validation of the data. By that, I mean, like, get a surveyor, if you have the ability to, get a surveyor to come in and actually survey a couple of points. You can actually verify that the elevations that the drone is spitting out matches what your surveyor spit out. Might not always be possible. In our case, it wasn't, but I would highly recommend doing it because it's pretty good. It's not going to be perfect. I presented a bunch of stuff on some Google Earth features. I'm not sure, Josh, how much you want me to go into that, or do you want me to just kind of stick with some of the code I wrote?
I think we have time. You can go into that a bit.
Okay. So I think I'm just going to demo this in Google Earth if I can. See if this will work. So we use Google Earth in the Hartford Professional Chapter, just as kind of I'll say a data visualization tool. It's a nice handy way you can actually store and look at stuff. Oh man, I hope it doesn't freeze. Okay, here we go. So here's our community. One of the things we do is obviously just like any other project, your PMEL team goes in and you take a bunch of surveys to understand, kind of what the people want and, their situation and everything. One of the cool things you can do is if you have that data formatted properly in a spreadsheet, you can actually have Google Earth import it, and it will you can actually place all those surveys like actually on the map. So we asked, I think it was some 30 to 50 questions to each household, and by dumping this into a spreadsheet in the proper manner, you can actually have Google read it, and it'll put all the answers right in here in a clickable format. Just place them all over the map, so you can easily visualize kind of where you were talking to these people. So, for example, this happened to be a location that was referred to as D4. I can pull that up. I can tell. We happen to catalog. When it was taken, what time. Here are the GPS coordinates. Here happened to be the two interviewees. What translator was there? We asked them, how big their water containers are, all this stuff, and you can store it straight in. You can store those questions and answers straight in Google Earth, so you have like a clickable thing. Another handy feature is you can actually, so all my points are color coded. You can pick a category upon which to color code the dots. And in this case, the category is by the amount of water available to every person in that household. So this essentially maps or shows water scarcity for each and every one of those families. So it's kind of a neat feature. The other thing that we use it a lot for is like our topographic maps. So I created a couple of custom topographic maps for us, so I can, it's nice for when you have your assessment team is there on the ground, and they can actually understand what the lay of the land looks like. So this is another thing you can do is you can actually drop custom image overlays over the top of it, and I can see all of what the elevation of it looks like. So it might not immediately pop up that there's actually there's a mountain here, but with the elevation lines, you can see that, and then in Google Earth, you can show it in 3D. So I don't want to spend a ton of time going through Google Earth. I think a lot of people have used it. If there's any specific questions, I can certainly answer those. But I think I'd rather spend more time talking about code today.
I have a question.
Sure, go ahead.
So what was the difference, why did you use Google Earth for some parts, and then why did you have your separate drone map? Like what were the different questions you were trying to answer with that?
So Google Earth stuff is really just for data visualization. It's just a communication tool almost. Whereas the drone data is really helpful for actually getting a really detailed map of a specific area. So we used it to actually map out that entire dam because we wanted to understand if we ever wanted to create a water reservoir, we wanted to know what the underlying like topography of that area looked like, so we could calculate how much water we could contain, how much earth moving would we have to do, and we can get all of that data from the drone scan we did. So the drone scan is like a nice local thing, whereas where we use Google Earth more as a communication tool. Does that answer your question? I'll take silence as yes.
Yeah, I guess yeah.
Okay. If you have a follow-on question, feel free to ask. All right. So I want to talk a little bit about, so at this point I've talked about kind of how we communicate via Google Earth, and I've talked a little bit about the drone photography stuff, but now I want to talk a little bit about how some of the things we've done with, I'll call it remote sensing, but what really that means is working with satellite data. So there's a couple of good places to find data. These are two of them. I now have a better way, and I will show you at the end of this kind of how I access data on a regular basis. So one of the big things you can do with it is creating the custom elevation maps. If you find an elevation map, but maybe it doesn't have the precise levels that you want, or you want to do a couple other things with it, you can kind of create your own. So I do have some code if you guys ever want to see how that works. But essentially what I'm doing is I'm just reading it into Python and creating a contour map where a higher level stored in the pixel of the image represents a higher altitude. So TIFF files, which are an image file, they don't have to store like color data. You can actually have them store physical numbers, such as floating point numbers. And in this case, with a lot of elevation TIFFs, they will store the physical elevation as a floating point with an XY coordinate inside of the image. So that's one thing we do, is I can take that, I can plug that into Python, or whatever your favorite contour plotting tool would be that MATLAB, Python, C++, and you can create your own custom elevation maps, which is one of the things I've done. So I can further take that elevation map. Again, in our project, we're going down the borehole route, but as part of the alternatives analysis, you need to do, what are some other options? So we were looking at rehabilitating a dam and creating a small water reservoir for our community. So we did that drone scan. And the other thing we need to do is we need to understand the runoff area. So what area of land that if a water droplet hits will end up inside of the water reservoir. So I wrote a piece of code that that helps you visualize what it looks like. So what my code does is it takes a look, it reads in the elevation map, and what essentially it's doing is it's computing the gradient, i.e. the slope in two directions, at every single point, at every single pixel. And then what it does is it will pick a point on the map, and it will say what direction is the gradient going, and then that will tell it what's the uphill direction from a given location. So for example, if we seeded it here, it will say, oh, the uphill direction was this way. So the code says, all right, let's move, X amount of feet the other direction and recompute. And it will do this over and over again. And what it'll end up finding is it will show the direction that the water is going to run downhill. So I plot this over and over and over again with different starting points. And eventually you can see all the white lines represent the path that the water takes. So in the end, what you'll have is a bunch of streamlines, and you can see, okay, we had a bunch end up actually in where our dam was, and that was the scan that I showed with the drone footage earlier. So I just look, okay, find all the streams that end up in the dam. So just kind of work backwards. And I end up finding this whole area that ends up becoming my runoff area. So that was a kind of a neat tool I did. And I can walk you guys through the code if you want to see that. But the big thing is computing the gradient at every point, picking a starting point, find the downhill direction, step a certain amount of distance, and then recompute over and over and over again until the answer stops changing. So the other thing I do is actually color or processing of like color satellite images. And one of the things I want to talk about is how do you represent color? So you kind of, you need your eyes detect color in the, with 3 different color cells on your retina. And those represent the, the red, the greens, and the blues. So you can kind of think of that as a coordinate system, or in this case, 2 coordinate systems. You can think of it as like a regular 3-dimensional Cartesian system, and that's just, RGB colors. So I would need a mixture of red, a green, and a blue to generate all the colors possible, right, that humans can see. Or you can think of that as a color wheel, which represents like a cylindrical coordinate system, where the angle around the circle represents the hue, or what's the actual color, and then the radius and then the z value in that coordinate system represents how saturated, how faded that color is, and then how bright it is. That's kind of useful. And the reason is, let's say I'm trying to pick out all of the areas that have, or like, let's say I'm trying to pick out all of the areas that are roofs in an image. So let's say, for example, again, going back to our alternatives analysis report, we want to build a borehole, but as part of the alternatives analysis, we looked at a rainwater catchment system. Okay, if we want to catch rainwater, how much area do we have available to catch rainwater? So I went back and I looked at a satellite image, and we were very lucky that in our community, we're in kind of a semi-arid, almost desert type landscape. So we have, the ground is brown, and all of the roofs are some shade of blue, but they're always like slightly different shades of blue. So it's how do you pick out just the blue pixels? And the way is to actually filter the image by just finding everything that has a very specific hue. If you notice, one side of the roof is like a darker shaded blue, like because it's physically in shade, while the other side is a much brighter blue. But if you notice, they both have the exact same hue. Both have a hue value of about 200. So that means if I just loop through every single pixel in the image, I can, and then check to see if that pixel is in the right hue range, I can actually pick out all of the different areas in the image that are actually part of a roof. And so you can see that here. Here's our village, and I had the code step through every single pixel. And it didn't do a fantastic job, but it did a pretty good job. As you can see in the inset on the right, here's actually all the pixels that met my criteria. And therefore, if I sum all the areas of all these pixels up, I get the total area of the amount of roofs in our entire village, which is really nice for specifying a water catchment system. So here's another application of the same kind of idea. What if I want to take a look and find all the areas that are covered in vegetation versus areas that are not? Josh sent me the location of your village. You guys that look, fairly rainforesty, so the valley probably isn't going to change much throughout the year, but ours does in Tanzania. So I wanted to track throughout the year how much the ground is covered in vegetation and how much of that changes throughout the year. So I did the exact same thing. I had a code that looped through each individual pixel in the image, and it decided, was that pixel bright enough to be considered a cloud? So in this case, find me all the pictures that have a really low saturation, but a really high brightness. That's all the white pixels. And then find me all the pixels that have a hue that's in the green range, and those become vegetation. and then everything else becomes dirt. So by making that decision, every single pixel, is this light enough to be a cloud? Is it green enough to be vegetation? Or is it just something else? It goes through and I can pick out, I can turn that map, I can turn this picture into a map of what is and is not vegetation. So if I then sum up all the pixels and say how many of them were green as a function or as a percentage of the total number of pixels, I can get a number, or I can get a read on how much vegetation coverage I have. So here's a sample of our data going back through a couple of years. You can see 2019 was a little erratic. If I look at the amount of green coverage percentage of the image, 2019 was a little erratic. 2016 was a little more. 2016 and 2017 were, fairly consistent shape, but different magnitudes, and they all kind of fell off and went to this like super brown state, kind of in their summer. This is kind of. Sorry, go ahead.
I have a question. In the previous slide, how far from the ground is the drone? Like how high up is it?
I think it was 200 or 300 feet. I think I don't know exactly off the top of my head. I wasn't the one running it.
Oh.
So. Yeah, feel free to stop me if you have any questions. Just speak up. I can't see you raise your hand. Okay. So what I was doing here is I was processing, just color images, but not all satellites take just color. They can take other things too. So what I want to show here is some satellites. In this case, I really love the Sentinel constellation, which is a pair of satellites run by the European Space Agency. They can actually pick out a couple of very special light wavelengths that are useful for detecting vegetation or vegetation density. So there are chlorophyll, which is obviously the pigment or the molecule inside of plants that helps them, or that makes them green and then also helps them grow. That molecule absorbs red light very, very well, but it happens to reflect a very specific wavelength in infrared very highly. So if I look at for a given pixel, if I look at how much of the infrared it reflected versus how much it actually absorbed, I get a index or a relative strength for each pixel of how heavy the vegetation is. That's kind of what this image is showing, is what's the relative density of vegetation for each and every pixel. And in my previous image where I was just looking at the color, you just get one value. It's either vegetation or not. The nice thing about this is I actually get how dense the vegetation is. Not as an absolute number, but it's just a relative strength. It kind of helps, it's easier to see kind of differences and understand, maybe a little bit of what's going on in a more binary way than I can get with my, just picking out by color. So this is one really neat thing that I've been focusing on in the last 6 months, is kind of playing with spectrum that are outside of the visible wavelengths. So I want to show you guys a tool that I've been using for that. So this is a tool called Google Earth Engine. What this does is this aggregates all the data, or a lot of the data that's out there, by public satellites. This is the Landsat constellation, or Landsat series of satellites. This is Sentinel, which is the ESA's Earth observing satellites, and it kind of takes all the data and loads it into the cloud, so that you don't actually have to download and work with it locally. You can actually just ask for it. And you can do a bunch of work on it on Google's cloud servers, and then it will just feed you back the result. So you don't actually have to download anything. You just have to ask to visit it. So Josh gave me the coordinates of your guys's location, or of your international project. So I just did a quick demo to show you guys what your village looks like. mean, you guys know, but I can show you kind of some of the things I can pick off or learn from it from basically the other side of the globe. So then the other nice thing about some of these satellite constellations is you get like a high revisit time. By that I mean you get a satellite pass often. So in this case, this image was taken in, of course this is right in the way. This image looks like it was taken on August 24th. So this is kind of the region of what your community looked like on the 24th of August. You can see everything is super green, although kind of poke around. I think that's kind of what it looks like year round. But one of the things I can do is I can pick off like how vegetation density, sometimes I can kind of reveal things you can't quite see all the time. So like when I'm just looking at the art, like just the true color, I never really saw these kind of patterns that are indicating, you know, higher or lower density of vegetation. Yeah, that might be obvious later. But it's just kind of a neat tool to be able to understand just like how strong a vegetation growth you have. You can do the same thing, and instead of using vegetation density, you can actually understand like not soil moisture, but the amount of moisture content that this pixel is seeing. So it's interesting to note that you guys, that in this area or in some of these areas, while the vegetation is strong there, it might not be a super high water location. So it's just kind of some of the unique things that you can do and you can kind of pick off. As well as water, or this layer happens to be water column height, which will do, I think this is really kind of can be related to humidity. So this is a really cool tool, Google Earth Engine, that I kind of want to introduce you guys to. So a lot of the code that I've been running locally for, I had been running locally when I gave this presentation in February, is I've migrated to this service, so Google Earth Engine. If you guys get on, it's free to make an account. It doesn't cost you anything. And if you do, I can send you guys a link to the code I'm using that actually goes through and does this stuff. So just kind of this tool has a lot of really cool features built into it for people like us trying to look closely at satellite imagery of like climate monitoring. So one of the things you can do is you can actually have it filter. You can have it return only images that were below a certain percentage of clouds. You can have it do all of, excuse me. You can just have it give you in like a certain range or like a certain date range. You can have it filtered by a ton of things, which is really nice for trying to sift through a bunch of data very quickly. And it makes life really easy. I can't stress enough how much I think you guys should take a look at this tool, because it is really awesome. I think I was sharing tonight's time with another professor. I know it's 7:30. I don't know how much more you guys want me to keep rambling on, Josh.
No, that's fine. We're always open. We can definitely extend this if it needs to be. But yeah, does anyone have any questions or anything that they'd like Mr. Jackson or Mr. Johnson, sorry, to show them? I personally found it very interesting that you could do the whole community map thing as well.
That's a new one I've been playing with, so. Yeah.
I don't know about everyone else, but I'm definitely going to be asking Mr. Johnson for some of his code. So maybe we can.
Question.
Go ahead.
Is this service free?
Yeah, this service is totally free.
Okay.
It didn't cost me anything, and it hasn't cost me anything in these 6 or 8 months I've been using it now.
Is there like any special permissions you need to get in, or any applications?
I think I filled out a form, but I think I got an approval immediately.
Okay.
I don't really remember. But Yeah, so the, oh, come on, get out of here. Here's kind of the home page. It's just earthengine.google.com. And then from here, I think you can, oh, stop it. I think from here you can actually, I think here's where you can actually sign up. So yeah, I highly recommend checking out this webpage and just looking at the kind of things you can do. And then maybe what I'll do, Josh, I'll respond to your email or the email that you and I have been going back and forth on. And I'll see if, I know there was a couple of tutorials, like intro level tutorials that I watched when I was just kind of starting to learn how to use this. And I'll make sure I send that out so you guys can kind of look through or watch that tutorial and just understand kind of how the whole system works and just kind of basically how to get around. Oh, there's a sign up button up here in the upper right hand corner. So like I said, this didn't cost me anything. It's free to use, and you can just kind of, and yeah, it's open. It's completely open to use, and kind of it is what you make of it.
Yeah, thank you, Jackson. This is all very impressive.
Yeah. Like I said, let me know if there's anything you really want me to go. Like I was just trying to rifle through a bunch of stuff because I thought I was sharing the floor tonight. So if there's anything that anybody wants to see more in depth, I can spend some time going through in depth a couple or something if you guys want to see it.
All right. If not, we do have a presentation from Dr. Dane. He is unable to make it, unfortunately, due to a sudden emergency, but we do have a Zoom lecture that he was able to pre-record before this. Let me just share my screen. I just realized I didn't do that. Sure, I'm sharing my audio. All right, can you guys hear that? Can you guys hear the audio?
I don't think you started playing it, Josh.
It would be bad if they did this entire thing.
I can see it, but I can't hear anything.
Okay, here. Can you hear it now?
They're too quiet for us to hear. You're not sharing your audio.
All right.
There's a setting in Zoom when you share a screen that specifically says share application audio. Did you check that or not?
Share application audio. I don't think I did.
Or something similar to that wording.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to exit and do that again.
Yeah, I think it's under like advanced settings or something when you go to share your screen.
Share portion. Share computer sound. Okay, thank you. That's pretty embarrassing for a coding workshop, but hey.
Earth environmental science.
Can you hear it now?
Thank you all for inviting me to your Drexel Engineers Without Borders meeting to present a little bit about ArcGIS and what it can provide in a, I guess, more of a hydrologic, surface hydrology perspective. You can find my email here on the front page and also at the end of the presentation. And feel free to reach out if you have any questions. What I hope to present to you today is just a little introduction to ArcGIS. I'm focusing on ArcGIS instead of Google Earth and a few other software packages, simply because it does afford you a lot more in the form of analytical toolkit So what I'll do is I'll briefly introduce to you ArcGIS, present a little bit of the available data sources that exist, and then I hope to give you an example of how we might use this in modeling watersheds. Now what I've done is I've decided to use watersheds because one, it's a thing that I'm rather familiar with and that I teach in my home department along with ArcGIS, but also because it seems like many of the projects that Engineers Without Borders is tackling are hydrologically focused. So I'll keep that in mind as we move towards the later portions of this introduction. First, I want to open with what is GIS and what can it do. The long and short of it is that GIS is Geographic Information Systems. ArcGIS is a proprietary software package that works in one of these geographic information systems. Generally speaking, the system includes people, hardware, social networks, software, and data, and then some uniform procedures, as you can see in the cute little clip art to the right here. In more general terms, ArcGIS is at the least a very interactive smart map, and at its most, it is perhaps the most sophisticated software package for spatial analytics and spatial modeling. Obviously, because it is geographically based, it affords us a lot of ability to do far more than we could do kind of pen and paper style, especially when we're talking about spatial analyses or spatial models. That whole spatially explicit component really complicates a lot of the pre-existing work, and without the ability to do these analyses on our computers, we would kind of be stuck with not being able to move forward. So we'll continue here and just some of the functions that are provided by GIS. Remember that I said that it was a network, software, data, et cetera. It's all of this combined in a pretty big system. What ArcGIS allows us to do is move from data entry to editing spatial data, managing those data sets and database in pretty complex ways. And then it even offers us the opportunity to do particular analyses, as well as generate outputs that end up being useful to a wide range of audiences. The data entry bit generally starts with data import for most folks. That should look like you guys in the field with a GPS unit, taking a waypoint and then adding some sort of metadata, well, I shouldn't say metadata, actually, I should say attribute data to that waypoint. So here I've got this point and I'm recording weather, elevation, and habitat qualities. The reason I want to call that attribute data is because in ArcGIS we have actually 3 different data forms. We've got the actual coordinate data, but then we've got attribute data, which is associated to that coordinate point or feature. And then we also have metadata. Metadata is describing the nature of that database or data collection. So it talks about things like resolution and copyright data, who collected it, when it was collected, etc. Anyhow, you're going to start with that data collection and entry. And if you're generating that data yourself, then you should be pretty well set to bring that into ArcGIS and begin at least projecting it. You can also bring data in from remotely sensed either satellites or other organizations. And you can partner all these data together in ArcGIS and ArcMap to do some pretty sophisticated things. Now imagine if you had to generate both your point data, your coordinate data, and then you also had to generate all of the land use, land cover data for that extent as well. And also the satellite imagery. You wouldn't be able to do all of those things yourself. And so ArcGIS in that kind of social network allows you to bring all of those disparate parts together in new and creative ways. You can then edit those data. There are, well, in ArcGIS and ArcMap, there's a editor manager essentially that allows you to move points around or move features around, but also imagine that you might have a polygon outline in a particular study site and you needed to move the boundary of that line. You can actually do all of that in ArcGIS. You could also manage the database even further. You can copy, make sub-selections, merge data sets, split them, etc. But you can also, in the data management, you can summarize large data sets of spatial data very quickly as well. In the analysis here, some of the things that we're looking at in the very basic sense would be spatial queries, things like joins and relates, looking at perhaps a polygon study site and how it overlays some other data set. And we can ask ArcGIS to pull all of the data where these two things meet or intersect, or we can even merge those data sets together again. You can also do other things like terrain analyses. You can also do map algebra and moving window analyses. So you can do a lot of different things in the analysis toolbox. I'll show you a little bit of that in a bit. And then the output is kind of the big deal. You can create a map and it could look pretty and that could be it. Or you could also create other metadata and other database that you can share with colleagues and collaborators. So digital maps, yes, but also the source data for those things. Why use GIS though? Essentially, we're very fortunate to be able to analyze really complex spatial data all in one place at this point. And when I say that, yes, ArcGIS is an absolute mess, right? It takes a lot of computational power and it's sometimes very, very slow, but it's doing things that you can't do otherwise, as I had said previously. What it does is it provides us with a tool for improved decision-making. Whether you're modeling things in public health, or you're modeling watershed hydrology, or you're even just trying to understand maybe where some animal is residing or moving through the landscape, ArcGIS allows you to do all of those things fairly easily. Now, what I want to do is, before I get too carried away, is I want to share with you some of the available GIS data sources. Now, what I've got is a couple different suggestions for where you can source data. Now, I know Engineers Without Borders, borders being a really important feature of your work, or the lack of borders, means that you would have to source data from international kind of database servers and whatnot. Here I'm showing you everything relative to the US, because this is some of the most robust and well-developed data, spatial data out there. One of the ones that I use all the time is I actually use the National Map Downloader. And so I've got a little screen grab of it here for you. But I want to point out that it includes everything from topo maps for all of the United States, historical topo maps. It also has things like the basic boundary files that you would need. Where are state lines, where are county lines, where are roads, etc. There's also, you see elevation products and elevation source data. So there are LiDAR source data that you can analyze to generate your own elevation maps. But there's also the products, which are in many cases what we call, well, what I'm interested in would be a DEM, a digital elevation model. We'll see that recurs again later when we're trying to map and model watersheds. We need to know what the elevation is and how that's changing across our landscape in order to model where water should go. You also see that you've got hydrology here. Most of the products in the hydrology subset are things like watershed boundaries, stream lines, and watershed boundaries, national hydrologic data sets, etc. Then you see a few other things in there too that might be useful to you. And as you scroll through that, you could explore all of that relative to any particular state or extent. So you can kind of navigate in this map to the right and then download data that is available. Before we get too far carried away with where you can find other data, I want to just share that data in ArcGIS comes in a couple different formats. Here I'll talk about the three most frequent data formats that you could use. That would be vector, raster, and then image. When we talk about vector data, we're talking about data points, coordinate points, or lines. We're talking about lines that are geographically rooted, and the same for polygons. Now, raster is a little bit different. Most of you are probably familiar with raster data sets already, but you're talking about uniform tiling that describes very large geographic extents in many cases. Finally, we've got image data here, and this would usually be satellite imagery, but we also have a suite of analyses that we could utilize for analyzing that kind of satellite image data to create some of these other vector or raster data sets as well. Kind of irrespective of what you're doing in ArcGIS, you're probably going to use satellite imagery data as at least a base map, because most people need to look at some sort of known picture in order to infer or understand your data. But then you're going to have that data expressed as either a raster or vector format. What is worth noting is that you can move between vector and raster data in ArcGIS. So sometimes you'll find a data set that is perhaps raster format and you want to convert that into polygon format. You can do that, and vice versa. I also want to point out that you have a couple of different, I guess, software products available when you're utilizing ArcGIS. So ArcGIS is this proprietary software package. ArcMap is what I've already discussed with you for projecting and analyzing. But we also have something called ArcCatalog. And in ArcCatalog, you can bring in server data. So you don't need to necessarily just download data. You can imagine that if you're analyzing something for, let's say, an entire country, maybe you want to look at the hydrology, surface hydrology for all of Costa Rica. You're unlikely to download all of the elevation data for Costa Rica. You're also at the same time unlikely to download all of the land use, land cover data for Costa Rica. And so you might instead just call that data from a governmental server. So you can do that here in ArcCatalog, but you could also store all of your other data products as well in database in ArcCatalog here. And I'll show you in a bit where ArcCatalog meshes right into ArcMap. But here I am just kind of sliding very quickly through how you would plug in a web server URL, essentially web map server, to call large data sets. That's kind of cool because also the organization who's creating that and housing that data on the server can edit that, and you'll always have the most up-to-date version of the data. But you can plug it in here through ArcCatalog and then add it into your ArcMap. Here we are looking at ArcCatalog open as its own window with ArcMap behind it. You can kind of see ArcMap is starting to display some imagery in its main panel here. And ArcCatalog is just showing you that I've got some New Jersey web map server that I'm accessing, and I can drag that straight from ArcCatalog into my table of contents here to the left of ArcMap. Now what I should do is I should take this moment to tell you guys that ArcMap is really cumbersome, right? You should expect that if it could do the things that I suggest it can do, that it should also be bulky, and it is. In ArcMap, there are usually 2 or 3 places to find any one feature or operation, and you're also dealing with very large data sets. Generally speaking, the structure that you would use for ArcMap is you would have this table of contents where you're storing all of your database information, and then it would be visually projected here in the main panel. And ArcCatalog can be compressed and also appear as its own panel, either adjacent to your table of contents here or to the other side of your operating screen. Here I'm just showing you again some of the data available to you. Here you can see that I've structured my toolbars, but what I want to point out is that I've got the basic operating functions, the save, the print, etc. But at the end of that, I've got this plus sign button here, which is how I'm going to add all data. So I could either drag and drop it, or I can hit that add data button and create the direct link to that data. Either way, it's going to project here in this table of contents to the left. But you'll also see across this top here, you've got this little yellow icon, which allows you to open the ArcCatalog within ArcMap. And then you've got this red toolbox here, which allows you to access all of the analytical tools available in ArcGIS. I'll show you that one again in a bit because there's a very particular hydrology series of analyses within that Arc toolbox. To the right of that, you'll see here that you've got a little Python script window. ArcGIS will run from Python code, but next to that, you've got also this little kind of stock and flow diagram. That stock and flow diagram allows you to build models within ArcGIS that you would run iteratively or repeatedly. It allows you to include for loops, and a couple other iterator functions. But if you're going to do something over and over again as a GIS analyst, you create models instead of just pointing and clicking around. This really helps to automate your workflow process. Anyhow, back to the data here. This is just some standard satellite imagery, but of Philadelphia, including Drexel's campus and Center City. And that data, for the most part, is just imagery, right? So you can't really analyze that imagery very easily. Instead, you could use that imagery and create polygon data, raster data, or perhaps even analyze the pixel value of this image. But right now, it's just an image. You'd have to bring in other data on top of that in order to actually conduct some analyses. So you could also load that kind of photography or satellite imagery as base layers. That's already preloaded into ArcGIS. So if you were to click your Add Data button here, you'll see that under Add Data, there's also Add Base Map. And so some of the preloaded options include satellite imagery again, imagery with labels, streets, topography, nat geo, oceans, or even topographic maps. And so you can choose any of those that are important. None of them really come with analyzed or data that can be analyzed. Instead, they're placeholders. They're all there for your comfort and for your viewers' comfort when they're looking at an output map. Here we are looking at some true color aerial imagery. In this case, this is satellite imagery provided by the state of New Jersey of the New Jersey Pinelands. What you can see here is you can see differences between sand and vegetation, as well as water bodies. And so if you wanted to, you could actually go in here and you could use that to kind of sketch out either polylines or polygons for those particular land use features. We also have infrared imagery, which is a little bit more useful in automating analyses and also comparing vegetative types or land cover types between seasons, especially in the Northern Hemisphere. And like I said, you could use those data to kind of automate the creation of polygon data sets. Now remember that satellite imagery cannot be analyzed itself. The polygon data set can be. And in fact, you can actually create these polygons and then again, merge in other attribute data, which we could talk about in a future session if it is of interest to you guys. Now, so I guess I want to remind you guys that we're not teaching you ArcGIS here. The reason we can't do that is we could offer you 2 semesters worth of ArcGIS essentially, and you might then understand ArcGIS. It will not make you an expert or a spatial analyst, but you'll understand enough of it to get by perhaps. It's very difficult and impractical, I think, to try to teach somebody ArcGIS in a singular session. And so instead, I'm just showing you guys some of the things that could be done. And what you would have to do then is partner with somebody who does this for a living or is very familiar with it. And surprisingly, there aren't too many folks at Drexel who do that. But I'm trying to introduce you to some of the things that ArcGIS does. And then if you have questions, you reach out to me or particular analyses or models you want to run, we could collaborate further. Anyhow, so you go ahead and you analyze some of this satellite imagery, convert it into polygon or raster data. Here are polygons, right, outlined as lines. Here it is as an actual kind of polygon map, and then you could even take that map and rasterize it again later if you wanted to. I'll end with the available data and just show you if you're working in New Jersey or Pennsylvania most specifically, each of those states has its own repository and collection of web map servers that you could link to. And then I already gave you the one for the National Map Downloader. And there are no shortage of web map servers out there, many of which are run by either federal or state governments, or even international governments as well. Depending on the data that you're looking for, you'll find it. It's just a matter of who's housing it and where. The national map for us is the central repository, but if you're looking for things like soil data, you would have to actually go to the USGS, or I think it's maybe SRS or something, and you would have to download or link to their servers there. What I'll do here, just for the sake of time, is show you a little bit of what ArcGIS could do in modeling watersheds. So I went on your website and I was speaking to a couple of your e-board members, and they said that you guys do a lot of kind of water focused surface work. And so I figured this is where we can really connect. So in modeling watersheds here, I looked at this picture of a few of you guys in the field collecting some field data. But some of the questions that I think we might share and be interested in are things like, can we measure land use, land cover within a particular watershed of interest? Now you'll remember that a watershed can be defined as big or as small as you want it to be. You can utilize pre-existing hydrologic unit code, and you could do that for the US pretty easily. Most of those boundaries already exist, but you might want to use things that are kind of hyper-focused. I partner with a professor in civil and environmental engineering, Franco Montalto, pretty often, and here we're looking at modeling maybe surface flows across a couple of blocks in urban landscapes. And so there's no watershed for that, right? So you would have to delineate your own. We can do that in ArcGIS with some digital elevation models. We could also then analyze land use, land cover. We could look at how much space is impervious surface versus pervious surface. We could figure out where sources for pollutants lie and where they transport particular pollutants or biological agents to. That all falls under modeling runoff. And yes, we can do that. We could do that at any scale that would be of interest to folks, provided we could find the source data for it. All of this essentially is provided in what we call the spatial analysis toolbox in ArcGIS. That toolbox, right? So here I was showing you ArcGIS previously. I was showing you the table of contents here. I showed you how you could click on the Arc Catalog button, and you see that I've got instead here another panel that is just the Arc Toolbox. And within the Arc Toolbox, you see all manner of different sub-toolboxes, things about geocoding, things about editing some of your spatial data, conversion tools to convert between different formats, 3D analysts, which you don't often use in ArcMap, but you do use in things like ArcGlobe. And then also you've got some spatial statistics, and in the spatial analyst toolbox, you've got things like groundwater analyses, hydrology analyses, neighborhood analyses, and even kind of raster analyses very specific to entire tile data sets. When we look at this though, I clicked on the hydrology toolbox that expanded that for you, and what it allows us to do is everything from modeling the boundary of a watershed based off of elevation to determining where streams actually should lie in that landscape, and also even the stream order, right? So those of you who have had a hydrology course before will remember that stream order moves from very small tributaries to very large tributaries. And if you're in a landscape where you need to understand where that water is going and how fast it's going there, stream order might be very important to you. Along with stream order comes flow accumulation. Assume that you had a uniform 2-inch storm across the landscape. Where is water going to collect, and then where is it going to run to? All of these other tools within the hydrology toolbox are intermediate steps to help you build these models. Generally speaking though, you want to end up with an image like this. And yes, I'm super zoomed in here, but this is plotting land use, land cover data and streams on the same map for you. Yes, it's a little bit pixelated because it's in raster format, but we could smooth that out if we wanted to convert it to polygon format. But you'll notice you've got your streams in these blue poly lines. And then this lighter blue is noting wetlands. You also have black as urban, green as forest, gray as barren land, and then yellow as agriculture. This landscape I know is in South Jersey. It's part of a project that I worked on many years ago. But we were looking at trying to figure out what surface runoff would contribute to water quality. And so in a landscape like this, where you've got mixed forest, urban, and agriculture, you have a couple different sources that could impair water quality. You've got nutrient runoff from agriculture. You've also got nutrient and probably petrochemical runoff from urban. And then you've also got forest, which can contribute nutrients in the form of decaying detritus, essentially, or other things like tannins, etc. And so this is a really unique landscape where we want to know which one of these features might be contributing to any one of these tributaries' water quality. And then where these tributaries unite into a higher stream order, we might want to know which tributary is contributing the most. What this does is it allows us to improve our decision making about where we should spend effort, both monitoring and also implementing perhaps measures to limit pollution. Here we are looking at another image where I've rasterized it. So yes, in taking polygons and converting them to rasters and vice versa, you may not have too much pixelization, but here you can see that the tributaries are very broad and they're all uniformly broad. That's probably pretty unfair, especially if you care about the size of the tributary. And so if we were to rasterize it, it'll take the channel of the tributary and it'll create each of those as pixels connected to each other. But you might also even want to go one step further and make sure that you actually have that kind of geographically informed by, let's say, bank to bank width. And so that should change a little bit more, but here we've got it kind of washed out with just a wetland periphery, that lighter blue color. When you look at this, you'll notice the pixelization in that larger picture here. And then when you look at the inset, you see that the features are a little bit more smooth, right? So vector format data should smooth your features, while rasterization will create that kind of pixelated imagery. It does create sometimes a visual aesthetic that you may want or not want, but mainly it comes down to what data are you analyzing and how does that data best represent spatially. When we're talking about landscapes that are including built features, that's usually squares. But we can convert between the two, as I had said. When we talk about spatial analyses, one reason or one perk of using rasters is that I can actually reclassify raster data very easily in ArcGIS, whereas reclassifying or recodifying vector data would require a lot more processing time and a lot more of my actual time in making sure that it actually codified everything correctly. But in this case, if I'm using raster data and I know I only have 6 different raster cell types, I can actually go and I can code those by number. And I can start to create either binary maps where I'm connecting things that are natural habitat versus non-natural habitat, or I can connect things based off of pervious versus impervious, or I could even create resistance values for future mapping. And in that case, I'm thinking about least cost path analyses, which is important in surface hydrology, right? Remember that water is always flowing in the path of least resistance. And so a least cost path analysis is a no-brainer. But here I can actually utilize the tool reclassify in the spatial analyst toolbox, and I can recodify my data. When I do this, right, I created a binary map. I basically took all the land use, land cover data here, agriculture, barren land, forest, urban, water, and wetlands, and I said whether or not I wanted it to be considered natural or not, habitat or non-habitat in this case. That becomes very important because if I want a really quick and dirty analysis for what the landscape is contributing to a waterway, habitat versus non-habitat is pretty useful. Habitat should be expected to contribute natural or less worrisome contributions to surface flow, whereas non-habitat is going to introduce anthropogenic sources of pollution to water flow. And so here I've got that binary map, and when I project it here, habitat is lime green, non-habitat, including roads and development, is gray. What I could do next is I can utilize some of my spatial analyses, some of the kind of focal statistics or neighborhood analyses. Imagine I wanted to analyze every point in the landscape with a 100-meter buffer around it to figure out whether it was mostly habitat or not. Well, I can use this toolkit here called focal statistics. The focal statistics allows you to assign the neighborhood. In this case, the neighborhood is a radius of 100 meters. rather I should say it's not 100 meters. In this case, I'm using the cell. So whatever the width of the cell was, if the cell was 1 meter, then yes, it's 100 meters. If the cell was 10 meters and I used 100 cells, then I'm talking about, wait, what did I say, 10, 100, 1,000 meters here. So you can have those different features here to develop the radius for your focal stat. You would then run this for every cell in the map, and you could create a heat map essentially. Imagine essentially that we've got these 5 different cells and their neighborhoods defined. I shouldn't probably call them cells, but instead circles. That's our focal area with radius of 100. And like I said, that 100, if it's a 10 meter buffer, I should be about 100 meter radius for each one of them, but they're uniform circles. And I can see that in each one of them, there's visually some differences. This circle far to the right is all habitat. The other circles to the left are varying degrees of habitat versus non-habitat. But when I go ahead and I analyze them, I'll come back with a value, and I can compare each of the values of each cell to each other cell, basically saying that the neighborhood influences any one cell's behavior. In this case, I come up with a heat map talking about kind of environmental quality, taking into account habitat and not habitat. Areas that are very deep dark green have a very high habitat value, so they're very natural. Areas that are red are very much urbanized and not natural. Everything in between, that kind of grading through that yellow or yellowish brown, is somewhere intermediate. And you can see that I've created a heat map now that helps me to predict perhaps where severe areas of urbanization might be impairing surface water quality. There's some intermediate steps here, but I'm not going to spend too much time walking you through those because we're not actually doing ArcGIS today. And in fact, getting students in my ArcGIS classes to do this usually takes about a week. But you can start to look at this and think about this as an output image, right? This heat map is far more informative because it's a gradient heat map than the binary map was. Binary map, let's go back to it, right? It says, well, I can basically only say that this circle on the far right is habitat and everything else is mixed. But the degree to which these areas are mixed and their influence on each cell is critically important. And so this output here helps me to resolve transitions across landscapes. I can also take that and overlay it again with the binary map. So I can show you the heat signature of urbanization underneath of actual urbanization. And it becomes a little bit more clear to you that yes, urbanized areas do correlate really, really well to surface water quality. And I can even reclassify that again. And so that where I've got this map that might have several thousand pixel values between green and red, I could reclassify all of that to reduce the number of potential cell values. And when I do that now, I can start to see isopleth. So if you look here where the very habitat dark green areas are grading into urban areas, you can start to see those isopleth lines appear. That's really cool because I can then take that data, that raster data, and I can plug it into another suite of tools in ArcGIS, and I can create those vectors and create maps that start to look like topo maps. Though I'm not talking about topography in this case, I'm talking about perhaps the severity at which the landscape changes. Generally, we want to talk about landscapes that change or grade very, very smoothly. But if you see a bunch of isopleth lines here stacked up very quickly, actually, this is a great example, right? You've got a lot of lines stacked up very, very quick. And you're saying that I'm moving from natural to built environment over a very small distance. If it were me, I would say I need to go there and probably put in some sort of green stormwater infrastructure, or at least make sure that runoff isn't flowing into this natural area. But it automatically tells me that I've got an area that I can leverage in decision making. Another thing that we could do is, as I said before, we could use digital elevation models to put the tributaries back on that landscape. So here I am, I go to the national map, I'm searching for South Jersey, and I say, show me what kind of elevation data you have. They've got a 10 meter by 10 meter raster digital elevation model, which I can then use with some intermediate analyses to figure out where water should flow and create this tributary map of those blue streams. I could even then go back and create the stream order for them. What that looks like though is throw in a couple of very useful analyses in ArcGIS towards a digital elevation model. So digital elevation model, or DEM, is the product you can download straight from the federal government. But it doesn't yet tell you about slope change and across distance. And so we've got a tool in ArcGIS, in the spatial analyst toolbox again, called slope, which will allow you to define the neighborhood size and determine the degree slope across that landscape. Again, creating kind of a heat map output, but that heat map output would then be useful in determining the high points in the landscape versus the low points. If you're thinking about hydrology, those low points are going to be streams, lakes, or ocean. And if you've got high points, that means that water should run from that very quickly. Again, you can find an area like the lower middle of this map and say, okay, I've got very high elevation here, relatively speaking, and very low elevation somewhere else. You can almost start to see the streams emerge in this map itself. I can take that though, and I could throw that map into another process called aspect, and I can figure out which direction each tile is sloping in. You can imagine that two tiles adjacent to each other that are sloping like this are going to create a tributary right down the middle of them. But if you've got several of them sloping in the same direction, they're going to push the water further away. So aspect here tells us whether the tile is sloping in the north, south, east, or west direction. And it'll give us a heated map for that too. This is what the aspect map looks like, and it's kind of ugly, but in here you can see ridge lines forming. So I've got a very clear and prominent ridge line right through here. That means it's the highest part of the landscape. And then I can also see valleys off to the left and the right of that. That's very useful because then we're going to take that and we're going to plug that into the stream order and flow accumulation processes that I had showed you already in ArcGIS. Now, this is just a quick primer on what ArcGIS could do. As I said, I didn't want to get into showing you how to do this in ArcGIS. There's a couple of functional things. Just think about the first time you guys started using CAD. There's a little bit of a learning curve, and ArcGIS's learning curve is usually about 1 to 2 terms of futzing around in ArcGIS. But what you should see from this is that there is a lot of publicly available data out there. And there's a lot of questions that could be answered remotely with those data and bringing those data together in a centralized location. What I would offer to you guys is, as you move forward thinking about the projects you want to tackle and what questions you have, don't hesitate to reach out. Go ahead and it may not be possible for you being relatively naive to ArcGIS, but it might be possible to maybe somebody else in the department that you know, or a grad student, or myself. And that's usually what we see as ArcGIS specialists or analysts here, is that we do our own work, but we also assist a lot of other folks in their projects as well, because this can't be done in any other way. So that's just a quick rundown of some of the things that are available. If you would like anything more specific moving forward, again, reach out and we can record or host more sessions describing the use of ArcGIS or other spatial analysis software. Thanks again for having me, and I hope you all have a great week.
Okay, I'm sorry we ran a little over, but I want to say thank you for everyone who's able to stay behind and view the whole thing. I hope you learned as much as I did. I'm very grateful for both our presenters, even though Dr. Dane could not be here in person. Special thanks to Mr. Johnson for showing us his custom built code, which I will definitely try to see if I can get my hands on.
And one of the things is a lot of the stuff he was presenting in ArcGIS is a lot of stuff I recreated, and I only recreated it because I didn't have access to ArcGIS. Because we're a professional chapter and a lot of us are mechanical engineers, it's proprietary software. We don't have it. So if you have it, use it, because otherwise you end up writing shit from scratch like I did. So if you have it, use it.
I don't know. It's pretty impressive what you did by yourself.
I appreciate that, but save yourself the trouble.
All right. Does anyone have any questions or any other comments they'd like to have? If not, I would like to thank everyone for attending this once again. And I wish you all like the best until we see each other probably again next week. Let's stop recording.
All right. Thanks, Josh.
Thank you.